is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets! But enough talk! Have at you!
Castlevania Symphony of the Night is the game that nearly every other Metroidvania game released after it is compared to, including all the other 2D Castlevanias released after it. Symphony of the Night was released during the time of the PlayStation 1, and Castlevania before then consisted of stages where you'd enter a castle and make your way to Dracula by jumping from platform to platform. Most Castlevania games were linear and high in difficulty. That started to change thanks to an employee of Konami, who many fans of Castlevania have likely heard of. Koji Igarashi, also known as Higa, had come to work for Konami since 1990, but he wasn't working on a major project until Symphony of the Night, where he was a programmer, a scenario writer, and an assistant director for the second half of the game, alongside Toru Hagihara, who was the producer for the entire game, but programmer for only the second half. Toru Hagihara was also the director and programmer for Rondo of Blood a couple years before Symphony of the Night was made. Symphony of the Night was the sequel to it. Toru Hagihara is not as well known as Iga. He didn't work on future Castlevania projects after Symphony of the Night in 1997. Many of the later Castlevania projects for Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 2, and Nintendo DS were produced by Iga. It may be because how well Symphony of the Night was received. It was Iga's idea to make Alucard the main character of the game, and to add an RPG element, and make the castle more explorable than previous Castlevania games. Toru and Iga also brought Ayame Kojima to the team, who was a self-taught artist that created the art for Symphony of the Night. And Nobuya Nakazato, who had developed many of the Contra games, was assisting Ayame as a graphic designer for this game. The soundtrack for Symphony of the Night was created by Michiru Yamane. Michiru had been working at Konami since 1988 and had created the soundtrack for Castlevania Bloodlines for Sega in 1994, which was a breakthrough for her career. It led her to create the Symphony of the Night soundtrack and the sound effects for it. Symphony of the Night soundtrack is still regarded as one of the best soundtracks in gaming history. After the game was complete, it was finally released on March 25, 1997 for the PlayStation. A year later in 1998, a Sega Saturn version was released only in Japan. In this version you could play as Maria, which wasn't available in the PlayStation version. You could also play as Richard Belmont from the start of the game without having to beat the game first like you did in the PlayStation version. In the Saturn version, there were also 2 new areas that were added for you to explore. While the Saturn version was only in the Japanese language, a few hardcore fans of the game have released a patch to translate the entire game to English. It's now playable in English for players who don't know Japanese. For Symphony of the Night, Konami had some of the most talented people working on the project, and after it was released, it was received very positively by critics. Many of the gaming news and review sites were giving the game a high rating. The team involved in this project did not know what they were creating at the time. Higa and Toru did not know they were creating a game that many independent developers would attempt to replicate 25 years later. Symphony of the Night will still be the game many Metroidvania games will be compared to, as it had arguably the best combination of characters, art, story, soundtrack, and gameplay of all the 2D side-scrollers ever made.
Still uttering the same nonsense. No matter. Now is the time to put aside your weak human side and join me in remaking this world!
Dracula, in the name of my mother, I will defeat you again!